So the first thing we want to talk about is just what is sex work, because there are a lot of different definitions and people think of it in different ways. It's also a good time to talk about language. We use the word sex work. Other people use different words, such as like sex trade worker, or people use specific words like escort or cammer or stripper to describe the work that they do. Peers used to use the word prostitute, but we've kind of moved away from that as more sex workers became involved in peers and we became more of a rights-based organization. Some people still do use that word to describe themselves, and it's important to respect that. But in terms of a community organization, we try to use sex work because it's more neutral and less stigmatizing than the P word can be. So I guess what sex work is to me is any type of work that involves the exchange of sex for money or services. That doesn't necessarily mean that cash has to be transferred. It could be having sex for a place to stay, for food, for favors, or for money. Yeah, it's the type of sex work is about as varied as the reasons people go into sex work. Some people are escorts, which usually means going on more dates, the kind of standard idea of sex work you might see in TV shows. Some people do street-based sex work, which is more survival-based sex work. Other people do camming, which is the kind of virtual sex work. Other people strip, and some strippers see themselves as sex workers, and some don't.
Awesome. Yeah, so you kind of led on to what I'm going to talk about a little bit, and that's just all of the different types of sex work that are out there. And I also just want to expand, like, it's not always just exchanging sex. Sometimes it's like there's massage parlors where it's a sensual massage, and then sometimes it's some sort of hand release. But that's also, they would consider themselves sex workers. There's also, strippers, cam girls, sugar babies, sugar daddies, are all kinds of sex work that are becoming more and more common these days. There's also fetish work, so there's DOMs, and there is, what am I missing? Strippers.
You said strippers. There's a lot of different.
There's so many types of sex work.
Basically anything in which you can provide intimacy or sexuality to somebody is sex work. So
yeah, there's also a market out there for like naked cuddling. There's a lot of different types of things that kind of fall under this big umbrella of sex work.
Yeah, I'd say especially for those of us who've done escort work, many of us have found that a lot of experiences, people are looking more for intimacy versus just sexual release. It's kind of called like the girlfriend experience, or if I guess you're a woman, or the boyfriend experience or partner experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So that moves us into talking about rights versus rescue. This is a really big value that Peers goes by, and it just means that we don't ever want to rescue any of our clients from the sex industry. If someone wants to get out for certain reasons, then we will definitely help them in that. But when people come to us, we try to meet them where they're at and see how they need to be supported, but it's never about getting them out of sex work. Because we believe that getting sex workers' rights and getting sex workers to a place where they have rights under the law and they have rights under employment and health benefits is going to be a way better way to support sex workers than trying to just rescue them from the industry for whatever reason.
Yes, exactly. And I think what's important for that model is that we don't need sex work to be empowering or great. Like anyone can have any type of relationship to sex work that they want, or feel any way about the sex work that they do that they want. We're about helping people maximize their consent and ability to choose whatever choices they're making. And we try not to judge anyone for that.
And at Peers, all of our services are just to help people be safe in their sex work. We get testing. We have our bad date report to keep each other safe while we're doing sex work. So Peers is really, really big on this value.
Yeah, we call it meeting people where they're at. We don't make people go in any direction or try to do anything. We ask them what they want from us, and then we try to meet that as best as we can.
Cool. Yeah. And there's something called the sex work spectrum. We're not going to totally get into it, but we just wanted to touch on a couple of them. So the three main ones would be like empowered sex work as being like the, you know, ideal model of sex work. And then it goes slowly over to survival sex work, and then ends on like rape or human trafficking, sex trafficking, any of those kind of like things that are not sex work. So empowered sex work, we would consider like people who want to be doing it. They get a lot out of sex work. They enjoy, you know, for the most part, meeting with their clients. Like it's a good job for them. And that's the job that they've chosen for themselves. And they do it completely willingly because they want to be doing it and they finding it a fulfilling job.
Mm-hmm. In the middle is more survival-based sex work, which is pretty much what it's called, people using sex work as a way to get by. That doesn't necessarily mean doing street-based sex work. It can mean because it is the best economic choice for you to provide for yourself or your kids, because of workplace discrimination, because of disability, for any reason that sex work is more of a practical choice, or maybe like a response to like experiencing marginalization or poverty or different types of vulnerability. In that sense, it's not just awful. It's not just empowering. It's not really. It's just more of a job that you might be doing if you didn't need to, and you might not be. But the important part is that it is still like a choice.
Definitely, yeah. And then on the far end of this spectrum would be like rape. So anything that happens non-consensually on a date is still considered rape. So if a John removes the condom, that's considered rape. So there are a lot of things, obviously, as you can imagine, which is why we have our bad date report. And then sex trafficking, which we don't see very much of in Victoria. What we see more of is exploitative situations where maybe someone is withholding someone's money and that they're drugs and forcing them to do sex work to get those things back, like a partner. Like we see it a lot in like domestic partner relationships. And yeah.
I would say that like trafficking does exist, but it is very different from sex work, and it doesn't occur in the same locations that sex work does. And I would also just say that as we talk about trafficking, it's really important for us to also clarify that sex trafficking isn't the only type of trafficking. There's a lot of different types of trafficking, such as exploiting agricultural laborers for domestic workers, and focusing on sex trafficking, which is actually the rarest form of human trafficking, is kind of a disservice to like trafficking in general, both because it doesn't focus on the more common types of trafficking, but because the kind of trafficking hysteria creates a myth about trafficking as this kind of boogeyman that doesn't really match people's realities when they're in exploitive situations. So it's not just that it harms sex workers, it also harms people who are being exploited, who do need support, because it's more about like policy agendas and political ambitions versus the realities of people who actually are looking for help.
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to talk about stigma next, because I think it actually really applies to like safety while working, primarily in my role in violence prevention and also Sophia's work in violence prevention. We do a lot of anti-stigma work because we believe that like sex workers are so often in places where they are experiencing violence because in many ways, people who want to do that to people target sex workers because they're somewhat beneath the law. So when we do this anti-stigma work around town to try and like talk about empowered sex work and really try to get people familiar and like understanding what sex work actually is and what it looks like and like the harms of, you know, producing that stigma against sex workers actually perpetuates more violence against them.
Yeah, there can be a lot of very real consequences to being outed as a sex worker, which is one reason that confidentiality is a really huge priority at Peers. It can mean consequences with your family, with your friends, with your partners. People can lose their jobs. People can experience discrimination in healthcare settings, or if they're reporting violence, or even come under scrutiny by like child protection services. Stigma is also really important to explain the violence sex workers experience, like the idea that if a sex worker reports violence and people think, well, what did she expect, or what did they expect? The idea that violence is inevitable as a sex worker, or as a sex worker, if you provide intimacy as a service, you are agreeing for that person to do anything that they want to you, is a part of stigma. It's a part of devaluing sex workers' lives. The idea that sex work automatically means someone should or will experience violence is a part of stigma, and is more of a source of the violence that like we face as a community versus just the act of doing sex work itself.
Yeah, definitely. So just trying to do more of those, and Peers does a lot of this in general, like going out into the community and trying to like really get in with like a lot of these agencies that sex workers also interact with and are like fearful to interact with, so that we can just start trying to do some of that work slowly to break the stigma against sex workers.